Hello, everybody. Let's try it one more time. I didn't realize Abe was going to give me a countdown.
I was wondering what
I was so confused. The countdown.
I know the file. I was like, does he know? Is he?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Words, Words, Words. I'm Daniel.
I'm Heidi.
And I'm Colin.
And welcome to this new podcast. Hopefully, we're here to look at words, to read words in books, and hopefully we'll give you a little bit of things to think about and make you laugh along the way. Without any further ado, then, I guess our first book we're going to be looking at is Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. Off the bat, kind of gut reactions to it?
It was fun.
I think my initial gut reaction is I liked it a lot, but I don't know if I would say I loved it.
I think that's fair. Now, keep in mind, I think that it is his debut novel. So I think, any author worth their salt, even like Brandon Sanderson, look at your shelf, Colin, has said that Elantris is fun, but it's not what he would consider his best work. So I think for somebody having a first novel that is good, maybe not great, is where a lot of authors start out as. And it is a promising start, I think. Anything additionally that you guys want to say about first reactions to it?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that just to kind of I will say it was good enough to where I would be if I was interested in the subject matter of his next book, I would pick it up. I think
he does have a new one out.
I
just saw that.
Oh, interesting. So I'll have to add that to the maybe list because he does a lot of things I think very well. I think it's very well paced. I think it's very well. I think it's very interesting. It's unique, and he goes for it. Which you bring up Elantris. I would rather read this than Elantris.
No shade.
I think that's probably fair.
Agree.
While I enjoyed Elantris, it was not my favorite thing that I've ever read. The new book, by the way, because I just saw this on Goodreads, is called Wearing the Lion.
Yeah.
I like that.
It looks like it's like a Hercules novel. One of the books that I guess puts a modern spin on mythology, which are always, in my opinion, interesting to read, kind of a modern take on classic stories like that.
Yeah, I like that. That sounds good.
This is an interesting book in that there's a lot of different styles that I would say that it covers. I've heard described as horror. Now, I think it uses horror as kind of the touchstone, but I don't think that you can agree with me or disagree with me, especially Heidi, because I know you're a huge horror novel connoisseur. I don't think I would call it horror, would you?
No, I don't think so. There's a lot of horror elements, specifically body horror. A lot of body horror. But as far as the subject matter, the plot itself is not horror. If anything, it's romantic dramedy with fantasy sprinkled in there.
I agree with Heidi. I think you worded that perfect when you said it definitely has horror elements, especially on the body horror. Without getting into too much detail yet, right? Even the original thought process behind the reproduction is pretty graphic and scary. But it's not like a scary subject matter. It's a sweet subject matter almost, right? I think romanticy is the most apt way I would describe it, and definitely funny, very funny. So I would add the comedy tagline in there too.
Mm. I mean, I think that I would say that it's probably in. Are either of you familiar with the idea of weird fantasy?
Is it a subgenre?
It's mostly in the name there. Yes, especially in the TTRPG space. But it's this kind of idea where things are intentionally a little stranger than you might even expect, especially if you're comparing it to a fantasy version of the Tolkien aesthetic. There's more to it, but I'm not going to go fully into it right now. But I think that's a genre that I would definitely put it in. And while it definitely has some horror elements, I didn't find much of it scary, which I guess it's a good question. Does horror have to be scary?
No, I don't think so. I'm not the horror guy out of us three, but I don't think it necessarily has to scare you, but I think unsettling fits into the horror, and I think there's some unsettling stuff here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, no, like I don't get scared very easily, but I'm a big horror fan, so no, I don't think it necessarily has to be scary because that is subjective. I think you can add a lot of different adjectives to make the horror genre, like Colin said, unsettling, horrifying, like it's right there, disgusting, creepy, all of those things, I think, but I don't think there's enough of those in this book to make it necessarily horror, but yeah, horror elements for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely horror comedy as a big subgenre. Again, I don't know that I would say this one is. It's interesting. I definitely there's comedic elements and there are horror elements, but I think it does safely fit more within like a dark fantasy, but with comedy kind of genre. Speaking of that, how do we feel about the whole like book from the perspective of the monster kind of thing? I thought it was a little bit refreshing, but I am interested in your takes.
I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. Like you guys have said, I have read a lot of horror, so I've read a handful of books from the perspective of the monster. One is particularly unique for me because I think in a way it kind of subverts the like fantasy trope of the hero being the good guy and the monster being the bad guy. You kind of get that other perspective, which I think is really unique and interesting.
Yeah, kind of another like trope that it kind of leans into and it kind of subverts, which I think the author does extremely well here, is a big fantasy trope, right? I think one of the ones that done it best is Joe Abercrombie's Devils this year, where the monster or the one you're supposed to villainize is the most human out of all of them, right? And I think sometimes that can be a little cheesy, where you make the monster be the most human, but I think that's one of the author's strengths, where he kind of walks that line kind of perfectly. Shesheshen has these elements to her that are so undeniably human, even the like, where she basically says, I don't know how to be human. Like, even that's like the most human. Like, I don't know how to be human too.
Really?
But also, like, what's perhaps most interesting in the book is that she is a shape-shifting monster, and he lets her be a shape-shifting monster. He lets her, thirst for people, right? He lets her have these monstrous tendencies, and I think that's not an easy thing to do, where she didn't feel, she felt real. She felt three-dimensional, and I loved her as a main character. My favorite part of the book is her, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no doubt.
Since you bring that up, I know you've read the Dexter series, Heidi. I don't believe you have, Colin. Is that right?
I have not.
Okay.
I read the first
Heidi,
one.
did you pick up any like kind of, just at least vibes-wise, a little bit of Dexter vibes on Secession?
Now
Like
that you say that,
yeah, the idea that she only goes for like the bandits and the bad parts of society, that's at least what I kind of thought of a little.
Yeah, for sure. And also the fact that murder is bad, like that's not like it just is, but you kind of you still feel for her and you still feel for Dexter. Like as much as Michael C. Hall doesn't want you to, because he doesn't, you still super feel for that character. Like Colin said, think Shesheshen is not perfect, but that makes her like so perfect and as a character, for me anyway.
Yeah. So there is something I want to explore, I think, in a later bit when I talk a little bit about more of the disability lens that you can put on this novel. So if I forget about that, don't let me forget about it. But especially as someone who, I guess I'll out myself to the audience in the first episode, I'm autistic. There are a lot of times when you feel like that outsider, when you feel like that kind of monster who doesn't understand the rest of society. But I've rarely read a novel about a neurodivergent character from a neurodivergent author. There is an element of kind of own voices in that. So that's something I do want to touch on, but I think I'm going to touch on it later. I think it's also a very good place to bring up the fact that we are going to be spoiling this book. So if you haven't read it, stop right now, read the book, and then come back to us, and we will. You can continue along with our discussion. Or if you don't care about spoilers, then barge ahead. But we will be absolutely talking about the plot of this book. Okay, so next question. There's a lot of symbolism in this book. I know I have some thoughts, but I just want to open this up to the other two of you and just see what did you pick up on, what was interesting to you. The idea both of the children's names, especially to me, and then the idea that of all things, Shesheshen is, the epilogue kind of makes this clear, allergic to Rosemary is very interesting to me, considering what Rosemary kind of stands for. But what was interesting to you two in that aspect?
Touch on your Rosemary point, because I'm gonna out you as something else here, and it's the biggest Shakespeare nerd and fan that I know, who knows it the best. One thing, right?
I did
think
do
you
an
can
entire
touch,
semester or year
right?
of undergrad in Shakespeare.
Also, our podcast
A
is
big
called
thing,
Words, Words, Words.
Oh, that's
right?
good.
Who do you
If
think
that didn't
it
spoil
started
it.
with? You can tell me which specific Shakespeare work, but Rosemary is, it's loyalty, right? It's a big symbol for loyalty in some Shakespeare works. It's even they've used Rosemary, I think, it's either weddings or funeral rituals where it's kind of to show your your connection to family and all that. And I love that that's kind of how they use it, right? They kind of use it where full spoiler range, like, the rosemary wine, everybody take a sip from the rosemary goblet, right? It kind of shows you where your loyalty should lie and all that. So I thought that was a clever way to add it. And also rosemary gets added into, because we do, the author himself kind of struggled with placing a gender on, if any, on Shesheshen. He did say in an interview that he would describe her as female, as a woman. And a lot of ways Rosemary's used, right, is kind of for kind of like, I wouldn't say quite feminism, but almost like hit backward, like anti-feminism, right? Like kind of to show like it's a cooking substance, right? It's kind of to show like the feminine nature where it's kind of almost offensive, right? Whereas they're using a cooking herb to show something is feminist. And I think he uses that in an interesting way where it is poison, right? It is this historically negative link with it is now poison in this one. I don't know if I thought way too much into that, but I thought that was another clever point he did with the rosemary.
No, that's super interesting.
That's a lot of the way that I was thinking of it. And to prove your point, but to clarify, at least the most famous Rosemary line that I can think of from Shakespeare is from Hamlet, where Ophelia has already kind of gone crazy and is giving flowers and other things to Claudius and Gertrude. And the one thing she says about Rosemary is, there's rosemary that's for remembrance. Pray you, love, remember. And that's another thing that I think I want to bring up about the rosemary, is that there's an interesting part of Shesheshen where she has to remember how to be human at times. And that's, again, going to get into that a little bit later when we bring up the whole disability thing. But there's the idea of masking, and I think that's an interesting thing that's kind of what poisons her. Something that stands for remembrance and that kind of deal there. Anything stand out to you, Heidi, about the symbolism?
Yeah, I was more on what Colin was saying about how it's feminine in nature and that it being poison. Also, like to me, her being feminine, and this is something that the author mentioned too, is that like she wants to feel connected to her mother. Like that's a big part of her motivations throughout the entire book. And so like the fact that the rosemary is poison to her, so is her wanting to feel connected to her mother. Spoiler for the end. So that was a really interesting point that you brought up. So no, you did not think too far into it, because that is exactly what I was thinking also.
Yeah, that's a great point too about connecting back to her mother, like metaphorically and literally, like, right?
Yeah.
It was poison for her.
Yeah. And then the names of the children are something else that stood out to me, because they are such common literary tropes. So you have, hopefully I'm not forgetting any, you have ode, you have epigram, you have catharsis, you have homily, and eventually you have epilogue as another child. So what's interesting about these is they kind of, in some ways, who and what they are, I guess.
Yeah.
Like catharsis is this, especially in the theater world, it's the expulsion of pity and grief, I believe. And so he's the first to die. You have this Shesheshen wake up from her slumber, and the first thing that's going on is that somebody is, robbing her house, looking for her as the monster. And so she literally gets some catharsis from killing Catharsis. Ode is a poem that is dedicated to somebody. It's a joyous kind of thing, and ode is like the mother's favorite. You have homily, who is much more subdued and is more of the uh so homily is a lot of times used in religious discourse, and that fits kind of what homily is. She's that caring presence.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to add on the homily too. Like the main point of a homily, I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up the religious part, is the connection, right? Religious speakers will use the homily to connect to the audience, to the people, to take these supernatural thoughts and ideas to make it personal into your life. And that's exactly what homily is, right? She is taking this monster and caring for a monster how anybody would to someone they love, to a human they love. And I like him. That was one thing right away that jumps off.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And she's also like, she's Shesheshen's connection to the world. As soon as Shesheshen meets Homily and is like starting to like fall for her, she starts seeing the world a little more clearly. She starts being able to pick up on other people's facial expressions and all this stuff because she recognizes them. Oh, I know that Homily makes that face when she feels this way, so that's what that person must be feeling. I thought that was a super interesting like succession.
And then you have epigram, who, an epigram is kind of like a pithy or meaningful or witty kind of saying. And of especially the part that epigram plays towards the end, where Secession kind of takes over as her, very much kind of fits with that as well. I guess then the question becomes, is it too on the nose? Because this kind of stuff can get old quickly if it's not used well. I would argue that I think I enjoyed at least making those connections, but I know that my brain doesn't work the same way that everybody else's does.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Sorry, thought it was too on the nose, but sometimes like those kind of like, it just fit the genre. It fit the genre so well that like sometimes things can just be fun and on the nose, and that's okay. Like not everything has to be a convoluted think piece. Like it can just be what it is.
Yeah.
Personally, I enjoyed it.
Before you put in your point, Colin, that does remind me that one of the genres that we didn't talk about was cozy. If we can call cozy a genre, it's more of a, I guess, modifier on another genre usually. But you're absolutely right. It does fit with it if we're thinking of the cozy kind of genre as, this is kind of comfort food. Then yeah, it does work there.
Yeah, I'm glad both of you guys make that the two on the nose point. I think that's an unfair criticism we give to a lot of media in general. To make like a film reference real quick, the one that just came out, like Weapons, right? It's very on the nose with its symbolism, to the point where, spoiler for that movie, they even show like an AR-15 in the air as an alarm clock, right? They kind of roll your eyes a little bit. But I don't think, like, you don't have to show to. I'd rather usually I say I'd rather you show me than tell me, but sometimes you can do both and it's fine. And I think there are criticisms I have for this book that we'll get in. That's not one of them. I'm never going to criticize somebody for being too on the nose, because what's on the nose for us might not be what's on the nose for my mom, who's going to read this book next, right?
Totally.
So I'm not going to hold that as a critique.
So we talked about a little bit about the characters. I'm curious to know just kind of, so we have two main characters. Do you see yourself more as a homily, or do you see yourself more as Secession? I know my answer is going to be very easy, but I'm interested in hearing your two.
That's a tough question.
I relate to. Yeah, that is a tough question. I hadn't really considered it. Shesheshen said a lot of really relatable stuff. I mean, basically, there's a part in the beginning that I specifically related to because my legs don't work like they used to before. And in the beginning, she's like trying to get up and she's tired. She's been hibernating. And she's like, oh, these somewhat resemble legs. These somewhat resemble ankles. That'll do.
That actually brings up something that I found interesting. So in an interview, the author mentioned that he kind of views Secession's need to find body parts for her as kind of his way of talking about prosthetics and disability, not just from a neurodivergency, but from a physical point of view as well. And I'm not going to get as much into that side of it. So I think it's interesting that you saw that in your own struggles as well. The idea of Secession's physical disability, because I personally was focusing a lot more on her neurodivergency.
Yeah. I mean, she has physical struggles throughout the whole thing. She has to eat people to be strong. So that part I personally don't relate with, but a lot of the struggles that that
You
come
don't?
before that, no, certainly not. Certainly not. Look, me, Heidi, the person, sometimes I have trouble sounding sincere. In this moment, I promise you, I'm being sincere. I don't eat people.
You
But
sounding not sincere, never.
right. That is a real struggle I have in my everyday life. But anyways, I mean, everybody has struggles with their appearance, and Shesheshen has to do a lot of work in that aspect to fit in, beauty standards and this and that. Like it directly correlates. And like we said before, nothing is too on the nose. Like there are very clear parallels with societal issues throughout this entire book, but that is definitely one that I related to Shesheshen on a lot.
Yeah, I think the physical disability is really something that's interesting. I read another interview from the author where he wanted to make that a point too. Like even Shesheshen's name. Did you guys read that where her name came from?
Yeah.
He's
asthmatic.
asthmatic, right? So he makes a wheeze and he says it sounds like Shesheshen. Like that's what the name sounds like. He's like the character is so disability coded that he's like, I'm just gonna go all in. And I respect that. It's one thing I put in the prose column of this book is he goes for it. And he doesn't hold back punches. And he had a kind of a beautiful but also heartbreaking, if you think about it, quote in that same interview where he's saying that as a neurodivergent author, he's told to mask. He's told to write his characters quote unquote normal. He's told that if he writes characters that are like him, that nobody's going to buy the book. Nobody's going to read the book. So he kind of said, F y'all, I'm going to write a book that's like a character that's like me. And, look at the reception. The book's overwhelmingly positive. I think it sold well.
I believe it won the Hugo. Yeah.
Exactly. It's won awards.
Yeah.
It's inspired more authors to write from that point of view. And I think that's something amazing. It really it shouldn't be something that we sit here and consider brave, but he was brave for doing that, right? And
no, it absolutely is brave. Absolutely.
And I think that's one thing he does well to kind of tie back into your original question of which character do you relate more to. I think he does that well where both characters feel real. Homily maybe I think feels a little less real to me. Aside from her family, she's almost, I don't know, she's a little too nice. She's a little too caring, a little too giving. She's honestly
a little too understanding. Yeah.
She's perfect. Like she's too delightful. I've never met Homily. I've never met somebody as nice as Homily personally. And I'll admit I'm not as nice as Homily is. Right? I don't know if I could be as understanding as she is. And so I found her hard to relate to, but there's definitely aspects of Shesheshen that anybody can relate to. We'll talk more about it later, but when she's talking about how she's having to learn how to be a human for Homily, that's something everybody can relate to regardless of any status or anything that anybody may be going through.
I guess I will segue a little bit into saying that obviously I identified as Shesheshen a lot. I did my graduate thesis on disability theory in theater. So this is something that's, very important to me. Yeah, I think what I want to talk about here a little bit is that either of you familiar with the idea of the models of disability?
I am not.
So I'm really just going to talk about two right now. There's more than two models, but I'm going to talk about the major two. The first model is the model that people have used for years, which is the idea of the medical model. What that does is it holds up the perfect body, the perfect ideal body, mind, etc. And anything that is different than that is a deviation from the norm. What that means is that what disables you is your body. It is your fault. It is because my mind does not work the same as others. It is because Heidi's legs don't work like they used to. It is because my friend Christian is in a wheelchair. The problem is the medical diagnosis, but it is the defect in the person that needs to be fixed. And that is what that's what makes them in this book a monster. Whereas the better model, the other widely spread model of disability is the social model of disability. What this model says is that what makes somebody disabled is not a problem in them. It is a problem in how society has been designed. So, for example, my mother was born without a bone in her arm right here. She had TAR syndrome. I do not remember what TAR stands for. It's something to do with her radius. she was not disabled in the social model because her arms were short. She was disabled in the social model because when she would go to a grocery store, for example, the shelves were designed too high for her to reach her arm up to. What that can lead to is that can lead to both more understanding of people, seeing them as actual human beings, but also realizing that there's a lot of things that are a lot of ways and that society has kind of favored those who are more enfranchised. And what that has also led to is universal design. I guess I'm going on a tangent here a little bit, but the idea that things can be designed for everyone, which benefits everyone. And with that all in mind, a lot of society is not designed for an autistic mind. It's just not. Those of us who have autism, a lot of us cannot always read body language very well. It's hard to make eye contact. As a child, I was not diagnosed with autism until I was 30. So as a child, the number of times that I was told, why aren't you looking at me in the eyes? Is something wrong with you? Heard that plenty of times, and I had to force myself to, look people in the eyes even. So there's the idea of masking, which is that we have to pretend, essentially, put on the armor of a neurotypical person rather than showing our neurodivergencies. And so you brought up, Colin, in the book, he talks about, or in the author's note in the book, he talks about how he was able to unmask while writing. As an artist, I mean, that I can tell you that how freeing that is. I got to play, now granted, the character itself didn't have autism, but the way that I was told to play the character, I was allowed to unmask essentially on stage and not have to try to be a neurotypical person on stage. I was allowed to be my neurodivergent self. And that was one of the cooler experiences of my life where just like I was able to do that. With that being said, I'm glad that the response to his novel was as it is, because I definitely got some patronizing responses by critics who praised my performance, but then would also say like, well, it just goes to show that anybody can do it. But that also shows how we are othered. It shows how it's not just a human actor, it's a monster, in other words. It's somebody who isn't human or is less than human. That watching Shesheshen kind of struggle to figure out things, struggle to figure out how, social situations worked. I 100% felt that. And you could see almost in real time how that medical model versus social model works, in that those who only knew that Shesheshen was not human, she was a monster. But those who actually got to know her and actually gave her a chance, even Laurent, who starts out trying to be a part of the patriarchy, becomes a friend by the end because he gives Shesheshen a chance and actually sees the person inside of the monster. Now, I don't want to go too much further, but did that illuminate anything for you guys?
You told us not to let you go on a tangent and all this stuff, but this is the exact stuff that, like, this is why I was so excited to read this book and have this conversation, is because it is always very interesting to hear you talk about this kind of thing, and having like a real world, like, example of why this kind of thing works is very cool. And I like, we're talking about how, it has awards and it's been so well received in the general sense. Like, it's so, long story short, yes, it was illuminating and interesting, and a big part of the reason why I was so stoked to have this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Too, also you're very knowledgeable in this area. There's sometimes where it's probably a fault of mine where I'm reading the book and I don't really make a lot of those connections, just because I don't have that background, and I don't have those same experiences. So I'm kind of just I'm just reading Shesheshen. All I know is Shesheshen, and I think that's something the author does really well too. Is you are able to make a lot of these connections, and he doesn't make Shesheshen feel like a trophy on the case, right? He doesn't make her feel like you mentioned, kind of the horrible and rude and ableist remarks that you would get, that, oh, anybody can do it. You don't get that vibe from Shesheshen. You don't get that anybody can find love, right? You just get, this is Shesheshen and she is worthy of everything that everybody else is worthy of, and it's not because of any any trait she may possess or any neurodivergency she may possess. It's just because she's Shesheshen, she's on this earth, and everybody on this earth deserves equal, right? So I think your points with the author are very interesting, and I agree with all that you said as well.
To piggyback off of you a little bit, before we fully move off of the disability idea, now I want to be careful about this because I do understand that the author is both, has neurodivergency, is disabled, and I've read interviews with the author that they are ace, I believe, as well. There's a long-standing stereotype with people with disabilities where they are asexualized, not by themselves, but by society. They're either infantilized or people don't even consider that they could be sexual beings. Like I said, I fully respect the author for everything that they did. Is the idea that secession is almost repulsed by sex kind of playing into a stereotype, even if it fits the author's lived experience? Is it reinforcing that already harmful experience by giving a lived experience? Am I making any sense here?
I get what you're saying, and I'm glad you bring up kind of like the asexual and aromantic aspects of it, because I think that is something that could have been handled a little bit better. You bring up a fantastic point that we have as society and in media all across have this tendency to really de-romanticize and desexualize, not even asexualize, desexualize individuals who are neurodivergent, individuals who are suffering from physical impairments. And, I think one author who did it well, which is very unfair to compare, is I think Brandon Sanderson did it well with Renarin in Stormlight Archive. I think he does it really well by showing, Sanderson has alluded that he has written Renarin to be neurodivergent, and that we get to see Renarin kind of experience his sexual desires and his romantic desires, and he's kind of confused, right? And he's just learning. It's new to him. I think he does that well because it's all new to everybody at some point. It's all new to and it doesn't treat it any different. Here, it's like everything that I think he did so well with the neurodivergency itself, I think he does very wrong with this, where it is kind of like a trophy on the sexual end, where it's like, oh, well, look at this, and I did not enjoy that part of the book.
Yeah, I think again, it is his lived experience, but there's just not enough literature out there that show the disabled point of view from somebody who is fully sexualized, that having this be as big of a book as it is, I do think might feed into that negative stereotype.
And I think you make a great point. Like, it is important to emphasize that it's his lived experience, and maybe it's unfair for us to place this burden on him where, you as this author should be, showing the other side. But I agree with what you said. I do think that it could play into the wrong narrative accidentally, which can be a bummer when most things were handled so well.
Any thoughts, Heidi?
I a little bit disagree. I think that I don't think it was actually done that well, I will say. I don't think that, like you said, I don't think it's particularly fair to put that on this author, considering this is his lived experience. I also think that Shesheshen being asexual, I think it fit. I think it really fit the genre, and I think it fit with her character. Like, to me, it just made sense. She was truly disgusted by most human beings, and then there was Homily. So I think, like, with that, it made sense to me. Not to discount that there should be more representation of, sexual experiences from the lens of disabled people. But I think that this book can be separate from that also. I'm not the expert in that subject, of course, but to me, I think
you have a point. And I think my point in the end is not even necessarily that the author wrote it like that. It's that it's more of a frustration of all the disability narratives, this is one of the ones that made it big, but is still showing that stereotype, even if that's not what he meant to do.
Right. So I guess my answer is yes, it does feed into that stereotype, but I think also for me anyway, it worked in the book, and there should be more representation in other media as far as that goes.
I for sure agree with that point.
Gosh.
I'll bring this up. Kind of one of my favorite things I think about this book, and I wish it also kind of ends up being in my critique because I think he lost steam on this point. I thought he had a great kind of classist lens and point of view at the beginning of the novel that was really strong. In chapter 3, we have she makes this great comment, Shesheshen does, about how God's never being seen by humans, and she was like, that's smart of them because humans will find a way to capitalize and profit off the gods. And then she goes in and she's like, humans are creative with their disappointment. It'll be all about the money in the end. And he does that for like the first like 6 chapters. I was like, okay, like I'm really liking this narrative because we see that oppression against whether it is individuals who are physically disabled or not neurotypical, or even obviously this has a big kind of lesbian angle in this book, whether it be members of the LGBT community who are demonizing it, is political, right? More than anything, they try to typify a person and classify them into a specific little nugget, and then they will use that nugget to instill fear and for political gain and wealth. And I felt like he was doing that so well in the beginning, right? She was kind of come across like radical. She was like, yeah, these humans, they just, they hate me because that's how they make their money. That's how the Baroness retains her control and kind of makes herself relevant while they're sandwiched in between the empires. And then he just kind of drops that ball. And and I get it. I mean, it's a short novel. He has so many other things he wants to talk. And it's his first book, but I think that's one thing I wish I saw more.
I totally agree. I wrote down a quote from chapter 3. Shesheshen didn't understand what made the poor stop from eating the rich, for she was just a monster. I completely agree.
Do you think in any kind of way that the mother, the Baroness, being a monster kind of undermined that classist?
Yeah, and if we want to talk about this point, that is my number one least favorite part of this book is the plot twist of the Baroness being the monster. I strongly dislike that point, and I think it undermined all my favorite points of the book. I think it made the disability lens weaker. I think it made the class lens weaker. I think it was boring. I think it was a boring twist, and it felt cheap. And it's his first book. Right? This is the first one. I don't want to
first full-length published book, I believe. Yeah.
Right.
He's like written short stories that have been published. I believe this is his first debut novel.
And it almost felt like it suffered from that M. Night effect that a lot of movies in the mid-2000s started suffering from, where everything needed a twist. And I felt like he felt that he was writing this. He's like, I need a twist, when it really didn't. It was interesting enough that Homily was a wolfire and a part of this family, and they wanted to hunt and kill essentially Shesheshen. I think when we added that twist, it just kind of like, I gave the biggest eye roll and sigh that the book was elite for me up until that point. And then it went from elite to probably very good after that. And I was bummed to see that. I think it undermined a lot.
I just completely agree. It was, to me, I think maybe like her dad also being Homily's dad, like that could have been like the twist, or like if you really needed one, and Homily being a wolfire.
Yeah, that was
plenty
not
for
touched
me.
upon.
Yeah, right.
Right. Enough, yeah. And like I think because I thought that was the twist before the Baroness being her mother came about, and I was fine with that. I thought, well, that could have been more amplified, that could have been more well done, but still interesting. And then
So there is a disability media trope that if you've, especially in older media, so you outed me as a Shakespeare fan, Colin. I'm going to bring up Richard III here. The idea that outward disability is a manifestation of inward wickedness is a big harmful disability media narrative. So if we are equating monsters to neurodivergent folk, people with disability, in a lot of ways that means that the Baroness is another example of disability. But she's wicked. To me, yes, I do feel like if there's anything that undermined, even unintentionally, the disability narrative in it, that's a big one for me, is that she, of all the good that he did in this novel for disability representation, that felt like a step back. Of course, the villain in this is also disabled. Like, you couldn't not do that.
so glad you said, because that's exactly, you much more eloquently put exactly the point I was trying to make, where it's like we built all this book effort showing you that Shesheshen is worthy of everything that everybody else is worthy of, even though she is disabled and even though it represents disability. And then you go have the villain of the book be exactly the same, like, and maybe honestly, maybe I'm being a little closed-minded. Maybe his point of making that was like, hey, anybody can be the villain of the book, right? But I don't like that. Like, I think when we go back to the anybody can do this, you undermine kind of the work that you're putting in the first place, because we shouldn't think that. We should think that your character is just your character.
I want to touch on something that you just said, because I don't think, while I do think authorial voice is important, I don't think authorial intent matters. And I say that as a playwright. Once you have written it and it is in other people's hands, what you have written is what you have written. And how it is interpreted is valid. So in some ways, I don't care what he intended with the mother twist. And part of me thinks that maybe what he intended was to show that if, these monsters are neurodivergent, that she's masking and she is pretending to be a human so well that no one would ever suspect her, and that's why she's villainous. But it doesn't change the fact that you can read that other bit into it. And that's something that I actually have not seen touched upon, because I've looked at a bunch of other reviews, and I haven't seen that part in there. So I'm glad that you're also seeing that, because I started to wonder, like, well, if people aren't seeing that, am I just nitpicking too much? But I'm glad that you saw that.
Yeah, I was chatting with Heidi a little bit about it too when we gave our initial thoughts, and I knew that she, like, I could tell based off the tone of her text too that she was gonna have similar thoughts too, because we got to about the same point in the book, and we both went from, oh, this is a like, not a love, because honestly, like, that really took it out and really undermined a lot of the progress in the book for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I was being unfair, so I'm glad to get some validation here right now. Thought I was being a jerk, honestly.
Not this time. Just kidding. Colin's really nice.
I know you have some critiques of your own, Heidi. Anything that you want to add here?
Oh, I mean, I love horror, and body horror specifically it's not one of my favorites, to be honest. When it's done well, though, it is, like, visceral was the first note I took, and I feel like after a certain point in the book, it just wasn't as unique anymore. Like, there wasn't, like, a big payoff in the body horror aspect of it for me. I know that wasn't, like, the main, well, I guess it kind of is a main focus, because she's a shapeshifter, and she eats people.
Right.
Yeah, early on in the book, you have that moment where she smiles at Homily with Catharsis's teeth. She has that moment where, like, that of anything in that book, that's the biggest body horror. But I do agree with you that it did kind of get dropped.
Yeah. I mean, there's elements of it throughout. That specifically, I wanted more. I wanted some big, like, I think from The Offspring or Epilogue, I think there just could have been something wacky, or like something high fantasy but also grotesque, like which Epilogue is, but I think it just fell off a little bit for me.
Since we just mentioned the body horror and the family, what did you take away, I guess, from the scene where Shesheshen disguises herself as Epigram, then has the conversation with Homily? Because I think that could have been played for body horror, but I think it was mostly played for almost a PTSD on the abuse, which we haven't really touched upon yet.
Yeah, I think it like leans into the PTSD specifically, especially for Homily. She just found out that this person who she has fallen for ate her brother, and then is now standing in front of her as her sister. Is confusing. So, like, that's a little bit.
And she just killed her sister too.
Right, yeah, and now she is her. The way that Epilogue, not Epilogue, Epigram, there's a lot of names, okay?
Epigram. Yeah,
the way that she was towards Homily, and I felt really bad for Homily in that moment. I'll just say that, because she went through a lot. As sweet and kind and perfect as she was, she went through a lot. And I think that's also another one of my critiques for this book, is that homily, I don't think she showed how much she went through in her demeanor, at least not well enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were kind of told, not shown sometimes, with her, and the obvious PTSD that she's must have from the abuse that she suffered at the hands of her family. And I think that also then connects to an earlier thought about, the mother, which maybe that also could have been the intent, to show that, like, what's monstrous is inside, she's been abusing, but at the same time, again, doesn't erase what we talked about earlier. But yeah, Homily was treated awful, and yet she's the nicest person ever, which, maybe that's her reaction to it, but it would have been nice to see at least a moment where it truly, truly affected her and she didn't just brush it off to the side.
Yeah, I think the abuse stuff also wasn't his strong point in this book. I think and maybe that's not the lens he wanted to go too heavy on. But like you said, Homily ends up kind of almost too perfect. And we kind of are told what she went through. And we kind of see it at the dinner scene, right, where she gets smacked around a little bit verbally. But yeah, I'm more of a show, don't tell guy, as I already said. And I think that's something that could have been done a little bit stronger, but not going to hold too much against him on that. That's a really tough thing to write.
I almost feel like he would have been better sticking to one lens or one issue and trying to write a book about that, because you have so many jammed in here. You have disability, which I think is the biggest one. You've also got abuse. You've also got, body image, fat shaming.
Big time.
You've got all of this, and it's this big soup, and some things get lost by focusing on other things.
Yeah, I think that's a first full-length novel error right there, right? I think we mentioned Sanderson a lot because we all love Brandon Sanderson, but that's kind of what Elantris does, right? Elantris tries to do too much for a debut novel.
Totally.
And I think 100%, I'm glad you made your point. That's what I would end with my number one critique. He tried to do too much in one book, in the length of the book.
Any last thoughts before we haven't really talked about whether we're doing ratings or just tiers. We'll talk about that in a second. But any last thought before we get to that part?
Just kind of last general thoughts. It's a good book, pretty covers on all the editions, so that's a plus.
Yeah.
It's a good book. I'm not going to sit there and say there's a lot of valid criticisms you can make about the book.
I'm also a big sucker for the purple pages.
Right, the sprayed edges. I love that. I think the author shows a lot of promise. I will definitely follow his career with intrigue. He did enough to buy me in, and I hope that the next one I read, I do see areas of improvement on some of the things that didn't really hit with me. Last thing I would say, if somebody has not read the book, I would recommend they go and read it for themselves. And it's good for, I think, if you can find a time to read it in October, November, it does give that kind of fall vibe to it. So I think
if you don't want to read a full horror, it's a good Halloween-ish novel.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And there's a witch hat, so that adds to that.
Right. Yeah. The witch hat. We didn't touch on.
I love the witch hat.
One of my notes was justice for Blueberry. So I'm just going to leave that. That's the best
character in the book. Hands down.
Yeah. So
Blueberry the goat.
Blueberry the goat.
So
that was my note. Blueberry the goat in my notes.
If you want to talk about on the nose names, okay? A bear that is blue. Blueberry.
Blueberry.
I had a stuffed animal named Blueberry as a kid, so that really hit home with me.
Nice.
Was it a blue bear?
It was not. That's the worst part.
That's okay. You know what? Not everything has to be on the nose, I guess. Yeah, that was my last note. It was justice for Blueberry.
All right. Do we want to do like a 1 to 10 rating, or do we want to do like a tier system, or do you each want to do our own kind of thing?
I think kind of how you were saying with final thoughts is probably stronger, where we kind of give like our final little remarks on the book and kind of put an end on it.
Well, then I'll give mine then. Yeah. So for my final thoughts about this, I do think that it is I think it's big for disability representation that this book got as popular and well received as it did. There need to be more neurodivergent characters, especially with the current administration and RFK Jr., his views on autism. According to him, I could not be autistic and a playwright. There's no way that I could ever write a poem. That shit needs to get out. And to have a character who is as sympathetic as Shesheshen in a book that is this critically well received, that has this much backing behind it, that has gotten as popular as it is. It's a big step. It is really a great example of disability representation. That being said, I do think the book has some areas where it can improve, but like Colin, I'm 100% going to follow this author's career, and I look forward to picking up Wearing the Lion and reading his take on Hercules.
I would absolutely recommend this book. One of the notes that I wrote down was, in the body horror aspect, it reminded me of a book I read called Walking Practice. I didn't write down the author of that book. That's on me. If you read that book, do the audiobook. It's very grody and very gay and just really, really good. But this book reminded me of that one. So if you liked that, or if you liked this book, read the other one. And yes, I would recommend it.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend this book. There is a lot of positives to this novel that I would again recommend it to anyone who doesn't see themselves in books a lot, who is on the autism spectrum or is disabled. The more that you can read positive examples of yourself in media, the studies have shown the more that it can improve your own psychological health. Representation matters. So 100% to that community, to my community. I would also recommend it if you're looking for just kind of a little cozy read that's going to take you maybe a few days, but is going to be a really fun page turner, and you're not looking for epic fantasy. You're just kind of looking for like a cozy little fantasy with some horror touches. I think this is a really good book to pick up and read.
Yeah. I think I give it a little softer recommendation than you two. I definitely would recommend. I'd probably be a little more limited in scope who I'd recommend it to. Like Dan said, I think it's the perfect book to go if you're in the middle of some series. I read this right after finishing The Grace of Kings, which is a pretty dense book. And it was a very nice change of pace. It was a very quick, easy read. We didn't talk about it too much. It's a very cute book, too. There's a lot of really cute stuff in the book that will make you smile. The ending is very cute. It's funny. It's very funny. It's
also pick up the Barnes & Noble's version because you get a little bit of an extra epilogue there.
Right, exactly. And it's even cuter in the extra epilogue, not the kid, the actual type of end of a book. And I would recommend it for those who are trying to either add a quick number to your Goodreads finished list or get a good little break from those dense series you're reading.
Now, for our next episode, we're going to go a little bit less feel-good. And since this is Heidi's recommendation, Heidi, what are we reading next week or next episode?
Yeah, next episode, we're leaning a lot more into the horror genre, which is, you will learn, if you keep listening to this podcast, is my bag. The Fisherman by John Langan. I hope that's how you say it. I am so stoked. I was going to start it today, but I am going to tomorrow. Yeah, stoked.
I've already read it. It's one of my favorite cosmic horror novels. We're also going to add on an extra little novella that shouldn't take very long to read if you want to follow along with us. I don't have that physically, but it is Wild Spaces by S.L. Coney. Another, I'll say fun, but I've also written a play about cosmic horror, so it is one of my favorite genres. Hopefully you can stomach it. If you want to talk about some body horror, we talked about the horror aspects in this book, in someone you can build a nest in, but The Fisherman will have a lot more of that. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
I am very scared for this discussion and this book. This will be my first horror book, so I will probably cry. I'm a big baby, but it'll be good for me to grow some hair on my chest.
You're a regular size baby.
It's also a really good book. If you've ever lost somebody, it is a profound meditation on grief as well. So I'm very interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Can't wait. Can wait, but don't have a choice. So can't wait.
You do have a choice, but you're choosing to be here.
Good point.
All right.
And I appreciate you for that.
And with all of that, I think that wraps us up for our first episode here. I hope you enjoyed Someone You Can Build a Nest In as much as we did. And I hope you'll enjoy The Fisherman as we discuss it next time. Signing off from Words, I'm Daniel.
I'm Heidi.
And I'm Colin.
And we don't have a tagline yet, but keep reading.
Keep reading.
Keep reading is good.
All right. Bye,
We'll
everybody.
workshop it.
Hey, everyone. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at contact@wordswordspod.com. Don't worry, I'll put it in the text of the show. Or you can find us on Instagram at wordswordspod. Whether you have book recommendations, thoughts on today's discussion, or just want to say hi, we are always excited to connect with fellow readers.
And speaking of community, if you're looking for more conversation between episodes, we've got a Discord server where we talk books, share recommendations, and just generally geek out about all things speculative fiction. The link is in the show notes, and we'd love to see you there.
And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and following us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast needs served. It really helps us reach more readers and keep those conversations going. Thanks so much for listening or watching, and we'll see you next time on Words, Words, Words.